The evangelists sent by Pope Gregory and his immediate successors felt their authority threatened by their British co-religionists. St. Augustine cursed the Welsh bishops, and their priests were duly slaughtered.
The religious dispute was mostly about the complex matter of how to date Easter correctly, the role of bishops, liturgy. To our eyes, perhaps truly pettifogging disagreements. Although the theological dispute in detail need not detain us, its historical implications must. It was all about conforming to Rome's teaching, submitting to the Pope's authority, which the British in Wales, the West Country, and the northwest into Scotland were reluctant to do after 2 centuries of worshipping in their own way. Christians were not absolutely cut off from Roman teaching in Britain. The monasteries along the west coast of Ireland were supplied with books by sea, and possibly copies were made and circulated in Britain. But popes had hardly been free in the 5th and 6th centuries to promote the faith in the outlying lands. They had been obliged to focus on their Italian heartland to secure their position after the fall of the Roman Empire in the west. Like Britain at the same time, Italy had been subjected to barbarian invasions of Huns and Ostrogoths, as I shall relate in the next episode. A smooth, continuous thread of teaching in the early centuries of Christianity is contradicted by the facts. An heretical sect known as Arians were significant in Western Europe. We saw in the last episode how the Welsh British bishops could not come to an accord with Augustine. St. Patrick was sent to Ireland not just to evangelize the pagans there, but to minister to existing Christians. 100 years later, Ireland had conformed to Roman orthodoxy. By 620 to 630, a picture is emerging, I think, of disunity between Christians in Britain and the relapse of kings or their heirs to paganism. We have reported the conversion of Aethelberht of Kent, the first Christian English king, and how his heir Eadbald reverted to heathenism. A few years later, the convert King Eadbald of the East Saxons, who had 3 sons, died. All 3 had pretended to accept the faith and been baptized, Bede tells us, but relapsed on their father's death. King Raedwald of East Anglia worshipped the pagan gods and Christ at 2 altars side by side in the same shrine, although Raedwald's part in the Christianizing of his kingdom had been critical. He sheltered Edwin, Prince of Deira, brother-in-law to Aethelberht, pagan king of Northumbria. Raedwald defeated and killed Aethelberht in 616 at the Battle of the River Idle, and Prince Edwin succeeded as the first Christian king in the northern kingdom. Royal support was still essential for Christianity to break new ground. This is a good moment to speak of Sutton Hoo, for it is thought possible that the burial ship that was discovered in 1939 at Woodbridge in Suffolk was the memorial to King Raedwald, who died in about 625. Although no human remains were found, the boat contained all that was necessary for the king's afterlife. There are pagan and Christian motifs on some of the grave goods, which include baptismal spoons. There is a helmet of gilded bronze and a huge concave salver of solid gold, officially stamped in the name of the Byzantine Emperor Anastasius, who reigned from 491 to 518. There are silver and bronze cups and basins from the Near East, demonstrating a wealthy East Anglian court with wide trade links. There are garnets, possibly from Sri Lanka. Perhaps whoever was buried at Sutton Hoo wanted to keep his options open with the Christian god and the pagan gods. The hoard is now at the British Museum. Politics then as now was built on temporary alliances, but Anglo-Saxon politics at this time stood on the dangerously shifting sands of tribal and dynastic loyalties. Perhaps they still do, for what is a political party or a trade body, whether the Conservative Party or the Trades Union Congress or the Confederation of British Industry, but a tribal association? Many unions, political parties and businesses have also been run by dynasties. King Edwin managed to find the firm spots in the quicksand that was Northumbrian tribal politics. His conversion is important because his kingdom of Northumbria was much larger and more powerful than that of East Anglia or Kent, where Roman Christianity had first put down roots. It was a king of Northumbria who finally polished off the last of the great pagan kings in England, Penda of Mercia, the Midlands, in 655. This period was the Northeast's golden age, and Bede revels in it 70 years later, but with a bittersweet nostalgia, because by the time of his history, Northumbria was already in terminal decline. The region illustrates these uncertain Anglo-Saxon allegiances. Northumbria was originally two kingdoms. They were Deira, which comprises modern-day Yorkshire and much of Lincolnshire, and Bernicia, which includes County Durham, the modern county of Northumberland, and at its greatest extent, all the land north to the Firth of Forth in Scotland. Edwin was of the Deiran line and Aethelberht of the Bernician, and the competition between these two dynasties was a serious problem for Paulinus, the first leader of the Roman Christian evangelists in northern England. Comparable difficulties were encountered by Birinus and his successor evangelists among the West Saxons about the same time. But we have to put Northumbria back on the shelf for now. Dealing with the narrative history of England in these times is not straightforward, as it would become after the Norman conquest, when there was an undoubted central authority whose kings by their actions and reactions created the narrative. To be sure, there are countless pre-conquest people and places of interest in themselves and as contributors to the national narrative, but it is the central authority, the king and his court, who set the stage and write the script. In speaking of kingdoms like Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, Wessex, we are almost speaking of their modern regional equivalents, formed unnoticed in the early 1990s by the Tory administration of John Major. Fortunately, the present Tory Lib Dem coalition in Britain has been much less interested in these interfering, money-spending, unelected regional oligarchies, and they are being cut down to size. Abolition would be good. Wessex would emerge as the preeminent kingdom in the 10th century, but one king and one kingdom finally coalesced in Canute and his eventual successor Edward the Confessor in the 11th century. Then came William the Conqueror. Despite some weak kings in the later Middle Ages, a deposition or two, and even a regicide, Richard II and Henry VI, there was never any doubt that there was only one king and only one kingdom, where law became uniform and policy was the king's. Until the 10th century, popes and their other rulers had to direct their attention to different power centres in England, and the matter only settled with Canute's seizure of the kingdom in the 11th century. After the Conqueror, popes and brother rulers just mailed their letters, as it were, to the King of England. Some regions or kingdoms rose or declined in power, as we shall see, and this means that we have to jump around the country geographically and chronologically. We cannot just give an account of the importance of the reign of Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, as we shall, without setting him in his historical context, otherwise I'm not serving you properly. There was a King of Wessex when Aethelberht was King of Kent, but we could not bring him in at the same time, because that would have detracted from the important message I was trying to convey, that Kent provided the first fertile ground for the foundation of Roman Christianity in Anglo-Saxon England. We have dwelt so far on Kent because it was the first foothold of the Roman Christians in England, when King Aethelberht was converted by Augustine and Canterbury became the first archiepiscopal see. 1500 years later, archbishops of Canterbury are still primates of England, if no longer Roman Catholics. Just when Rome might be thought by Western Christians to be getting matters right after the Emperor Constantine, the Western Empire collapsed, leaving its provinces open to pagan invasion and devastation. It was the very end of civilization to priestly chroniclers like Bede in England and Gregory of Tours in France. It must have appeared to reduce Western Europe into a melting pot of competing murderous interests, air bubbles in a ferociously hot ferrous concoction, which often exploded, casting molten metal indiscriminately. The fall of the Roman Empire in the West was a catastrophe for religious orthodoxy. It was also a catastrophe for the Roman civilization that the Anglo-Saxons had ignored at best and destroyed at worst the buildings, written law, and learning. It seems to me that when Bede speaks from time to time of the great Roman remains more than 300 years after the withdrawal of the Roman legions from their province of Britannia, he speaks of them with a kind of reverie of what these buildings must once have been like. The breakdown of the Pax Romanorum, the Roman peace, was a real tragedy to him and many like him. I am reminded of a poem attributed to an early 17th century Englishman, Francis Beaumont. It is titled On the Tombs of Westminster Abbey, but might do well here.
Mortality, behold and fear, what a change of flesh is here. Think how may royal bones sleep within this heap of stones, hence removed from beds of ease, dainty fare, and what might please. Fretted roofs and costly shows, to a roof that flats the nose, which proclaims all flesh is grass. How the fair world's glories pass. That there is no trust in health, in youth, in age, in greatness, wealth. For if such could have been reprieved, those had been immortal lived. Know from this world's snare, how that greatness is but care, how all pleasures are but pain, and how short they do remain. This will lead us neatly into the next episode, to what is meant by the Dark Ages.